I'm General Manager over the programs and services of the Oneida Nation, and that comprises roughly 900 employees across various departments and divisions of the Oneida Nation. I will begin this morning with a land acknowledgement. We are located in Green Bay, Wisconsin currently, myself and our two other speakers this morning. Green Bay is historically and originally the land of the Menominee Nation. Menominee Nation community is still located here in Wisconsin, but of course they have a smaller land base than they originally had. The original homelands of the Oneida Nation is the area of New York State. And as a result of colonization and the Revolutionary War, our nation, the Oneida Nation, was dispersed into three different communities. So today we have Oneida tribal members that reside in New York State. We have Oneida tribal members that reside in a community in Canada, and we have the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin here just outside of Green Bay. This time of year is maple tapping. That's a significant cultural practice for the Oneida Nation. We have a ceremony dedicated to maple trees, and then capping of maple trees continues to be a cultural event within our community and within many indigenous communities throughout the United States. So Dr. Anderson, would you like me to roll on to our presentation?
Sure, go ahead. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. So I will ask our presenters to introduce themselves. I'll start with Deborah Valentino.
Okay, just had to unmute myself there. Sagoli Swagwake, Wastageously, Galhalunko Siangats, Niangats, Wagaiskli Wage, Niwaki Deloda. So I said hello to everyone. My name is Gahalunquas in Oneida and Deborah in the English language. Let's see. Actually, I just wanted to kind of start with today that I'm really glad to acknowledge that I have 38 years of sobriety. And I have about 16 years that was an addiction. I was born on the Menominee Reservation and basically moved to Chicago after I was a year old. I'm the youngest of 7. And quite a few years between me and the next sibling. So basically when I was a teenager, I felt like I had a bunch of parents because my own siblings were all older than me. I wanted to note that it was important that my family was very loving and caring, but I also wanted to note that we also had something that we didn't realize was working against us, and I think that's, not sure if you mentioned that in regards to, what's the word I'm looking for? You said you were going to speak to it.
Historical.
After
the introduction.
Okay. So basically, that's one of the things that, I didn't really understand myself. So I basically, my experience in recovery, I recovered when I was in Chicago yet and did a geographical escape to Wisconsin for a bit within those years. But started around when I was 16 and, moved, basically went through the healing journey that I needed to do for that time. And, just wanted to mention some of that a little bit because we'll get more into it later. So I guess, and then I wanted to acknowledge that in my recovery, what happened was that's when I started to gain experience of helping others. And wanted to also let you know that my husband and I basically went through recovery at the same time, and we had the same sobriety date. And so after we sobered up, we pretty much started working in our communities, really kind of acknowledged the historical trauma that we'll be talking about, and why the different things that we had to go through, and how we acknowledge that, and helping people in the community, the Native community in Chicago. That's where I started, and then really, I came back to live in Oneida in 2016, and was not looking for this, but because of what was going on here, then we began to be part of a group that opened up what we called Jistai, our spirit, our fire within each one of us, and to continue to help people to heal and to recover in our community here. So I can basically turn that back to you. I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Deborah. Our other presenter today is Clint Peterson.
So, my name is Clint Peterson. Welcome, everybody. I'm a 55-year-old tribally enrolled Oneida. I suffer from substance abuse disorder. I was a IV drug user, mainly heroin and cocaine, for well over 3 decades. It cost me a lot of my life, 5 incarcerations in the Wisconsin State Prison System. Today, I advocate for sobriety. I'm married. I'm a professional semi-driver for a local company, and I'm a recovery coach. I know Deborah is as well. I don't know if she mentioned that. She does so many things for the people. And that's just, and I'm married. I'm a father of 2, a stepfather, and hello.
Thank you, Clint. So today, of course, we're speaking from a Native American perspective, and specifically from an Oneida perspective. So I'll speak to that briefly. I'll also introduce the topic of historical trauma. And again, this topic will be specific to our Oneida population. So within the area of the United States, there are 574 federally recognized tribes. That's data taken from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or BIA.gov. Of course, indigenous people stretch throughout the Americas, so the indigenous experience here in the United States is somewhat similar to the indigenous experience in Canada. If you're looking further south in the Americas, the indigenous experience is different as well. When we're talking about 574 federally recognized tribes, there is great diversity between those tribes. So different languages, different histories, different foods, different mannerisms, but there's also some similarities between our indigenous populations. One of those similarities is that we all experienced colonization, although that colonization history varies from tribe to tribe. For the Oneida Nation, being in the area of New York State, we had somewhat an early experience with colonization compared to some other tribes. For us, colonization started around 1600. And that's when the Dutch reached our populations. We established some very positive relationships with Dutch communities. And then there was a massive influx of European peoples into our territories. And what happened after that was traumatic for much of our population. Loss of land, loss of culture, loss of language. And that really culminated with the boarding school era. Boarding school era started in roughly 1860 and continued through the 60s or 70s, depending on your geographic location. The boarding school era was forced assimilation. Our children were forcibly removed from their homes and they were brought to these schools, which was not a welcoming or healthy environment for our youth. And what happened in those schools was a degree of education, but also a degree of abuse. And the purpose of these schools was to kill, and this is a quote from the founder of those schools, Henry Pratt. The purpose of those schools was to kill the Indian to save the man. So the purpose was to erase our indigenous cultures from our youth and replace that with some form of American culture. So kids were beaten if they spoke their language. They were not allowed to communicate with families or their communities. And they suffered many abuses at the hands of the individuals that ran those schools. And that's been well documented. There's a lengthy history both in Canada and here in the United States. And so for many people of my generation, that was our grandparents or our great-grandparents that experienced that. When they went into those schools, they spoke our language. They may have participated in our ceremonies. When they came out of those schools, they did not want their children to experience the same level of abuse that they experienced. So they did not pass on the language. They did not pass on the ceremonies. And it was a tragic loss of identity for our population. That also ushered in cycles of abuse for our communities. So if you were abused in the boarding school, there's a higher likelihood that you would abuse your own children. Loss of identity and loss of value in who we were as human beings. And again, that created cycles of abuse that continue through today, and a feeling of being devalued or less than other people. So again, that's a very quick history of historical trauma as it relates to our Indigenous communities. I do have a handful of questions this morning for our presenters. Again, I'll be moderating this discussion, and I'll start with Deborah again. And the first question is, talk about your lived experience with substance use disorder.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So in regards to what he was mentioning about, all this historical trauma, those abuses filtered down through the generations through my family. My dad was an alcoholic. My mother just tried to keep everything together the best way that she could. I remember my brother telling me basically a story. When when one of my brothers passed away, that our dad had mentioned at one point that if you ever encounter our own spiritual ways and our cultural ways, basically just run, because they weren't any good. They were wrong. So that was coming from our father, because of the beliefs that we began to believe about these things ourselves. And then I watched my family growing up. Like I said, I was the youngest. And so there was, a lot of events, a lot of birthdays, a lot of, different things going on that we'd get together. But because I feel like what I know today was loss of identity, I think that is a lot of the reason why the alcohol abuse in my family was, triggered and, happened within my family. I began experimenting probably at 15, maybe a little bit before that here and there, but really around 15, 16 myself. And, I remember in high school, going through high school and really being I'd be the only Native person in the classroom. So there would be all these other races within my classroom. And I felt alone a lot because I really couldn't connect with, people had their own groups and whatever, and whether they were, Hispanic or Oriental or, from various different groups or whatever. So I think my drinking stemmed from just not being able to connect a lot of times to people or, things that should have been familiar to me. And, it just escalated from there. After I graduated high school, I met my husband and, and it just even escalated even more from there because he was also Native. He was from the same tribe, Oneida. But I'm Oneida and Menominee. And when we met, that was one of the things, and that's kind of like where I started to learn a little bit too, even though I was drinking and doing those things. Then I began to, because my husband was more connected with the Native community in Chicago. And so that's where I began to learn a little bit more about, the things that happened. I still didn't really have a good idea because these traumas and these things that Mark talks about, those things didn't come up in the schools. Those weren't talked about. So I had to I was piecing together a little information at a time as I was, beginning to meet other natives in Chicago. So I remember there was a memory that I talked about when I was like 6 or 7, and I was playing outside. My neighborhood was pretty diverse. Again, we were the only Native family on the block, and I remember, my friend at the time, her brother, hanging out the window. And, all of a sudden you heard him say, get away from that dirty little Indian girl. And it really didn't faze me at the time. But I remember my mother also sticking her head out the window and saying, you stay right there. So I feel like I had a little bit of, that strength, I guess, from my mother, that basically kind of maybe hindered or like made me feel like I didn't have to feel so bad about certain things growing up. But that stuck with me for a long time. And I didn't remember it until I, got into recovery myself. So my experience with my substance abuse, I think, was a lot of, what really was handed down, because Mark talked about in a little bit of his talk was the fact that we didn't, when those kids were taken away and sent to boarding schools, then that just like really tore up our whole family structure. So we didn't know how to parent. We didn't parent very well, or we did, like he said, when those children were abused, and they abused their own children in different ways. So, that's just a little bit of what I feel like contributed to my use, my drug and alcohol abuse that I was going through, because it really clearly came down to the loss of identity that I just really didn't even know who I was growing up in Chicago. And it kind of filtered over a little bit into, my first months of recovery, because I also remember going into a meeting one time and basically having somebody who said, "What kind of Indian are you?" And I told them I was Oneida because I knew that, and they started to tell me about myself. That didn't make me feel very good. I almost didn't go back to that meeting. But these are the kinds of things. That's why I said it for me and my recovery, actually, and going through all that stuff. My identity was a big thing of reestablishing what that was. So,
Thank you. And I'll just make a quick comment about the use of some terms here. So if you look at older academic literature, the term American Indian is used. When during the course of our discussion, we may hear that term American Indian, Indian, Native, Native American, Indigenous, or of course Oneida. A lot of people will use some of those terms interchangeably. These days, there's a preference for the use of Native or Native American or Indigenous, or some people simply refer to themselves as their tribe or other people by their own tribe. Of course, the term Indian was applied to us by Christopher Columbus. Not such a popular term these days, but at one time that was a widely accepted term. So as we've progressed and moved through different uses and different terms again these days, the preference is on Native or Native American or Indigenous. So I'll pass the mic over to Clint, and he'll talk about his lived experiences with substance use disorder.
Hello again, I'm Clint Peterson. To touch briefly on what Mark said, I'm told what I am all the time. Political correctness, even that I'm Six Nations Iroquois, is a French word for black snake. I'm Haudenosaunee. Oneida. As far as substance abuse disorder, addiction, I got nailed on both sides of the family. Genealogically, my grandparents are full-blooded German on my mother's side, and my grandmother was full-blooded Oneida, and her husband, my grandfather, was full-blooded Norwegian. That makes me 1/4 Oneida Indian. And the federal government keeps track of me by blood quantum, just like they do horses. So, to reference Slim Shady, I am whatever you say I am. So political correctness is not really huge with me. I'm okay with whatever people call me today. The addict really hurts, or junkie. Those two really hurt. So there was drinking on both sides of my family. My Native family would argue with my white family. My hair is part of my representation, my culture, my healthiness, and my spirituality. My own grandparents cut it off to make my father mad. To give you a brief description of what I'm talking about, my aunt in 2011 got shot by a state trooper with a substantial amount of methamphetamine in her car on I-94 and was killed. And I have a little cousin that is in his 21st year of incarceration out of 23 for a drug-related shootout with the Green Bay Police Department. So addiction has ran rapid through my family. Violence, never picking up skill sets, how to solve problems. Both sides of my family, who could scream the loudest or hit the hardest was right. German side, Grandpa used a belt. Our Native side, fist. And my grandmother raised me pretty much from the age of 14, and she was 4/4 Oneida. So and I've lived out here most of my life. Today, I like to focus on the later aspects of substance abuse disorder. I got out on the tail end, or when fentanyl was first coming in. I personally overdosed 4 times on fentanyl and was saved by Narcan by dumb luck. Didn't even know it was there when it happened. So it's a blessing that I'm here today. And stigmas follow me through my culture, through my addiction, and we all need to start being a lot nicer to each other. We really do. We really do. I am fully supportive of avocation and the recovery coach program with people with substance abuse disorder. And I was asked the other day why people in with addiction just aren't should be running all this. And my answer to that was, I solved everything with my fist or my voice or my body language, and I was shooting drugs into my body. I didn't know how to solve problems. I needed professional help and professional people to help me solve conflict resolution. So drugs and addiction have destroyed my family, and today they're destroying my culture, and they're dying at a phenomenal rate.
Thank you. In leading up to this, I really, we had a few meetings in preparation, and I really enjoyed hearing the perspectives from Deborah and Clint. One of my questions and curiosities was, what was their pivotal moment in their own recovery? So that's our next question. Deborah, what was your pivotal moment?
Okay. I just wanted to mention one other thought that I had before was the fact that our own spiritual beliefs were not acknowledged, and things that we could have done to help ourselves, with were, you know, they weren't, like a lot of the stigmas that we had, they weren't good enough. Um, so I found it kind of, I mean, it was really like I think I just heard this the other day, so I looked it up again because I don't remember dates and all these things of all these different things that happened, and when things changed for us that we were able to do these things. And I graduated in 1977. 1978 was when they passed the Native American Religious Freedom Act, and then we could practice, our culture and our ways and everything like that. That was really surprising to me because, there's things that I've heard about a little bit, somewhat, but sometimes I don't really know the dates and stuff like that. So when I looked that up, I thought that was pretty appalling to me because these are the things, and this is what happened, that really worked against us, and again, going back to our identity. Pivotal moment for me. What led up to my pivotal moment was, there was a lot of things that happened, in my addiction, as far as the losses, the unmanageability in my family, within myself, um, you know, how I worked, how I handled everything, those types of things. The losses with both of our parents. It was either suicide, alcoholism, or murder. My dad was murdered. So, I mean, when you look at all of that stuff, um, how do you start to peel back those layers to try to figure out what do you need to do? I mean, I was in Chicago on a bus on a daily basis praying, like, how do I get out of this cycle that I'm in with my young family? I had 3 daughters at the time. And so this is what I was looking at. How do I do that? my brother, one of my older brothers, was the first one to really step up and decide, okay. And maybe he was backed into a corner a bit, but um, he was the first one in the family to really look at and go to treatment and try to recover. And when he did that, um, I started to work for him after high school. That's how I met my husband. He came, there to get a job. Um, but again, once we got together, we both had this problem, and we both weren't sure how do we, get better at this. How do we do that? Um, and then having these, addictions, of course, to the way we thought we could deal with things, so that we didn't have to feel certain things. We didn't pay attention. My brother would often ask us a question, and he would say, "Are you ready yet?" And you know, I think we tried a few times, and but finally, the one time that he took us to this meeting in Chicago, um, the meeting was in the middle of Chicago. It was part in the Native community there, but it was all Native elders. And so for me, and I told this to Mark and Clint, I went to this meeting because I was supporting my husband. I thought he was the alcoholic. um, but after that first meeting, I realized that I had an issue. It wasn't just my husband, it was myself also. But the important thing there, and this, critical moment for me, was the fact that they were all Native elders and that I felt welcomed. I felt like I belonged somewhere. I felt like these people really knew me, and I had just met them. It wasn't very long after that they made me the treasurer of the meeting, so they trusted me. Um, they had my husband running the meetings, and this wasn't wait till you're 6 months sober or anything like that. Um, they did this immediately. So this was something new to me, to feel like I belong somewhere. And this was the beginning point for me to start looking at who I was. So, yes, I think there was, and I always feel like there was something within me that knew. I just needed to find the right people. I just needed to find um, the right connections to then allow myself to get that understanding of what happened in the past. And I did. Um, I did some of that through going to school. I went to Native American Educational Services College in Chicago. And that's where I basically learned all of these traumas that happened, especially with the boarding school issue and all these other things that happened to different nations. And I got really angry at first, but then at the same time, I didn't want to pass that on to my kids. I wanted them to understand, but I didn't want to stay in that anger because that wasn't going to help us. Um, so my recovery did a lot for me, and that pivotal, critical moment for me, like I said, was probably just finding a safe space for me to be with people that understood who I was and where I came from and what I was about. So,
Thank you. Just some additional statistics for you. Native Americans are about 1 to 2% of the U.S. population. Due to genocide and other reasons, we have a small population. About 70% of Native Americans in the United States live in urban areas. So Deborah has been talking about her life in Chicago. That is not uncommon. Again, 70% of Native Americans live in urban areas. One of the reasons for that is, of course, employment and education and other opportunities within those areas. And within Wisconsin, the largest native population is actually within the area of Milwaukee, even though there are 11 tribes within the state of Wisconsin. So next over, going again to Clint, and Clint, can you talk about your pivotal moment in recovery?
Yes, I can, Mark. Thank you. I had two pivotal moments in recovery. First one when I was 33 years old. My girlfriend at the time, her pancreas exploded, and she had passed away in my arms. I had was never so scared of my own addiction after that. I had went to our behavioral health. I got sent to Canton, South Dakota. There was payphones back there. My grandma lived next to the building in an apartment complex. I went over there and said, "Don't worry, I'm going to treatment somewhere in Canton, South Dakota." And that's when I learned that day that that's where my grandmother went to Indian Missionary School and played basketball with Canton across her jersey. So I figured that was it. It was going to work. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But I did meet the Eagleman family and my Lakota brothers, and I had a spiritual awakening in Sweat Lodge. That's why that was a pivotal moment in my recovery. For me personally, without spirituality, I don't have a chance. And the second most pivotal moment was when I started using the internet and Google for something worth of value. And I discovered Portugal's and the Portugal studies. And when they decriminalized and turned it into a health problem and started utilizing teams of people to work with people like me, and there was a key component of that that I heard. 50% of the people that used IV drugs in Portugal stopped. Those are the best odds I ever heard. Everywhere else I went, it was like they were giving me square blocks, telling me to pound them in round holes. And when I couldn't, it was my fault because it wasn't their fault. And that's sort of the, let's see, I was incarcerated 5 times, went through 5 treatment centers there, 4 or 5 on the out. I've been through numerous treatment centers. Nothing was working till that. So I took the Portugal's format and put it inside of the framework of where I live geographically and made it work. And it's still working today. One of the people, it's Joe Schweiner, he's on the screen with me. He's huge in mentorship, Christian mentor of mine. I got my Oneida spiritual leaders that are also mentors of mine. I have a psychologist. But all that came off of waking up spiritually and the Portugal's dynamic and the importance of a team of people. Then I took it even a little bit further. You know, Brett Favre was an addict, and he had a really good, you know, there's a lot of sports on Sports Packer Fam. There's a lot of sports people and a lot of athletes that were really addicted, but the one thing in common they had is they had a good team of people around them. So today that Portugal's framework has been so important to me. If you do not have my best interest in your heart, you're not allowed in my circle. Just can't afford it. So extremely pivotal, saved my life and has helped me work with other people that I've seen become successful, designing their own similar style of getting teams of people. And you know, I don't have those degrees on the wall from graduating college. I wear them on my arms, and they're not pretty. So thank you.
Thank you, Clint. Let's take a moment to talk about stigmas that have either been witnessed or experienced. Deborah, can you speak to that, please?
I was reminding my mute button. Stigmas and how I overcame stigmas in my recovery for me was connecting. So some of the stigmas that I can recall and that I go back to is, of course, the drunken Indian, and we're more susceptible, lazy, dirty, uncivilized, just less than. And again, especially if we can't even practice the beliefs that we had, those types of things. So that all creates a low self-esteem, shame, um, creating that identity issue again. Um, and how basically how I looked at combating that. Um, I guess, like I said, I did get a little bit of that before I was in recovery, just because I began to like even, I was around other uh, people from different various nations throughout the country. Living in Chicago, like he said, was, there was, several different nations in that community. So I think when I think about overcoming that, once I got into recovery, I began to connect with first those elders. Then I began to connect with people more in the at the American Indian Center in Chicago. My husband was uh, more connected, and he grew up with that community than I did. Um, but of course, once we got together, then I began to meet more and more people. And in making those connections, I started to touch base with some of the people from where I came from. Um, I mean, I know that we were removed, and where I was born, it was in Wisconsin, um, and where my mother was from the Oneida Nation. So then I started connecting with spiritual leaders from there, just good people, and trying to figure out like what did that exactly mean for me? How do I connect all these things? How do I keep peeling these layers off and acknowledging the things that I have to go to get to where I need to be, so that I didn't feel this shame, so that I didn't feel disconnected. Um, Basically, I knew that I was, I mean, I was not a lazy person, but we buy into some of those stigmas when people keep repeating, and it's, just without even how you understand it, you don't really have that acknowledgement of how that happens, but it just trickles down for generations. And this is something that I did not want my kids to have to go through. I wanted them to understand more than I did. So, for instance, my children were actually a big part of me coming back to the community, because I think my daughter was in kindergarten, first grade, and she came home and she said, "Mom, they're calling us Indians." And I looked at her and I thought, "Oh my gosh." I said, "You are, you are Native." So to me, that was the beginning in my early recovery to say, this has got to change. I can't have them growing up not knowing who they are. That I already did that. I don't need that to be transferred to my children, to my grandchildren. So I'm pretty proud of that today, because my children are, yes, they go through stuff and they, still have a hard time, but they know so much more than I ever did. And my grandchildren are doing wonderful. The same thing. They're acknowledging who they are. They understand where they come from, and they're thriving much better than I ever did. So it's changing. And I think with when we look at these stigmas, how do we combat this? We do it by instilling that pride of who we are again. Through our healing and our recovery, the knowledge that I've acquired, um, and just sharing our stories. Things like this, sharing with people, because I really didn't know it. And when I lived in Chicago and I had even in Chicago as well as here, coming up to me and saying, I didn't even know that Native people were still alive. You know, those kinds of things are, uh, you know, I just don't understand that. Um, you know, I had people come up and say, you know, when did you get back? You know, things like that. And then I really, it, they were being very honest. They were sincere when they said, I didn't even know natives still existed. Um, so, you know, when you hear those types of things, and you you have from centuries ago people that came here and really looked, you know, like you're nothing, um, you know, and then the slavery, and then the thing, you know, they took us away, and then you're going to boarding schools because you're, you know, you got to kill the Indian. What is that? Um, you know, so these are all the things that we have to overcome, and we can do that together, and we can do that by, I feel like, you know, I'm not a professional in any sense of, you know, understanding everything or how things are going to work or what's going to happen today, but as long as I, you know, get up in the morning and I use my medicines, I use my sage, my tobacco, my sweetgrass, and my cedar, and I use that every day, you know, to start my day off. Um, that's how I combat these stigmas and my balance every day. Um, and that's how I want to continue to share that kind of thing with other people, so that, you know, we come to that understanding that we are important, we're worth it. Um, we don't have to believe all these things that we used to believe about ourselves. You know, and for some of us, you know, maybe we didn't, but um, you know, we let it get to the point where it did wear us down. And so, yeah, today, just sharing and trying to help people understand, you know, this is what we went through. You can't just look at us and say, you know, get over it, or, you know, um, you know, that was a long time ago. Um, it was a long time ago, but there are things that are still happening today. We still have a ways to go, but we're getting there. So.
Thank you, Deborah. Clint, can you give us your perspectives on stigmas?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. So we're seven generations people. We take and respect the seven generations behind us, the sacrifices they made, the things they did. So me, my kids, my grandkids, the things they have today. And then we think about the next seven generations forward. How are we supposed to leave this world to them? To go along, you know, with what Deborah was saying, we walk in two different worlds, and it's really hard to explain. And the philosophy is hard to explain. I mean, me and Deborah, we have two different stories, but as far as the native stigmas, they're really a lot alike. Never knowing who I am, everybody telling me who I am. I'm never good enough. I'm either too white or I'm too Indian, getting chased home from school, growing up in the white neighborhoods, you know, sometimes getting beat up by my own people because I'm not dark enough. I mean, it's just, you know, that was hard to navigate through. And what makes it worse is that I really got to start looking at myself and the way I view people and the stigmas I pick up. I'm no better than the next person when I'm doing it to people. I will never shake in my lifetime the junkie stigma or the criminal stigma. The other ones I can deal with. The race is just lack of education. Um, we have a medicine wheel that has 4 colors in it: black, white, red, and yellow. Those are the 4 primary colors of the people on the planet, and they're divided into force because they're equally important, and we're all meant to work together. That don't happen in addiction. I go for a job, I wasn't a very good drug dealer. I always did my own supply, and I never, if I broke even, I was having a good week. But I'm a criminal and I'm labeled a drug dealer. I'm a drug addict, so you better watch out, because don't leave anything lay around me, because I'm going to steal it from you, is the stigma I face. I can't hold down a job because I'm a drug addict and I'm a criminal. Today I'll be at 2:00 today. I'll be driving all the way across Wisconsin in a semi, but I can't be trusted on my reservation to drive a transit bus, because I'll sell drugs and I'm a junkie. You can't have those behaviors. So they're on and off my reservation. They're all over the place. And I know addiction is a complex problem, and complex problems need complex solutions. And it takes every dynamic of people working together, from the recovery coaches to the people with the doctorates. And that takes a lot of humility for us to all value each other's opinion and speak to each other respectably, and to get along, instead of saying, well, you're Oriental, you're Black, you're whatever, Native Indian, you're a junk, you're this or you're that. No, we're all human beings. We all have two legs, and we can all connect on every one of us suffer. That's why my culture is so important to me. That's what I've learned in Sweat Lodge. That's what I've learned in Christianity, is we all have a lot more alike than we really want to admit. Thanks to the professional people and the psychologists, I deal with stigmas a lot different today. I cannot control them. I can only feed into them. And to be quite honest with you, I'm really focusing on my own behavior so I don't stigmatize other people. That I'm crying on the inside. I'm tough, puff my chest, right? And when you call me a junkie and a thief and a horrible person, that really hurts. Really, really, really hurts. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have one more question for each of our presenters. That question will speak to our audience. So if you're a counselor, if you're a psychologist, if you're a service provider, if you're a recovery coach, both Deborah and Clint will give advice from their own lived experience in how to help those in recovery. So we'll start with Deborah. What's your advice, Deborah?
I guess, just from my own experience, after my own recovery, I had to get a little time behind myself in order to be able to help other people. So my experience there was, I was running groups and running meetings, learning how to take on responsibility of my own family, with and in all aspects of my life, with my job, going back to school, and there was a lot of times that I was able to, because of the connections I made, I was able to go to different conferences and learn about different things. Became a foster parent. When I got up here, like I said, and I was, in 2016, starting this grassroots organization with this other group and trying to help people through Yungwa Jistai, becoming a facilitator for wise women, from the White Bison, Mending the Broken Hearts, helping people to make that connection of, why they're hurting, why they're suffering. So my biggest, I guess the most thing that I can advise anybody, I had to learn how to listen. I remember my elders in Chicago telling me, in our community, we do not listen anymore. And, that's important. And I realized I didn't. I was not, I wouldn't listen. I'd be like that person who was trying to figure out, as you were talking, what am I going to say to you? So you're really not listening. And so to providers, I think, and I always say this, we make it, it's so simple, but we make it difficult as human beings. All we have to do is listen to the person. What is it that they're asking, or what is it that they feel that they need to heal? Um, and if you're working with people from the Oneida Nation or any other nation, find out about who those people, who they are as a people. Talk to their spiritual leaders, talk to their providers, see culturally what they would do. How can you help? Add to this. Um, don't just go in there and think that you have all the answers for them, because for one thing, I know as you know Indigenous people, we really don't trust. It's hard for us to trust, and so if if there's anything that you can do to help us do that, don't just come in and think you have all the answers for us. Really listen to what we're saying. And I think probably, like I said, that's basically the biggest thing that you could probably do for that person. Because when we feel like we're listened to, then we're more apt to open up and to accept that help, because those stigmas also stop us from getting that help, from mental illnesses, from everything. And so, and we're working really hard in our community to get there, but we do need to work together. We do need to reach out to other communities. We do need to make that connection, because in our culture, we understand those four colors, those four quadrants that Clint talked about. We're all connected, all races, everything that's, out there, the animals, the plants, the medicines, everything. We're connected to everything. So we have to do that same thing, for each other. We have to respect one another and be respected, and things will work a lot better. Well, those steps, won't be so hard to climb if we can do that together. So yes, listening, listen.
Thank you. And before we move on to Clint, I do want to recognize both Deborah and Clint for their roles in our community here in Oneida, Wisconsin. Deborah was recently recognized for the work that she and her husband and others did through Yungwach Yungwach was a gathering place here within the community for those struggling with substance use. It was a grassroots effort. They dedicated their lives, their money, really everything they had to our community. And it was a place where somebody could go and they knew that they would be heard. They knew that they would be listened to. And it was a place for connection, a place just to talk about what's happening and how can we steer you in the right direction. So thank you to Deborah, Yungwach, everybody that was involved in that effort. And Clint, I'm not sure I know a more passionate person when it comes to recovery services within our community. I don't know if I've had a conversation with Clint where he hasn't talked about recovery and improving services for our community, and his depth of knowledge, not only regarding his own recovery, but services that are available across a wide spectrum. He definitely has a depth of knowledge and understanding that I don't come across too often. So thank you to both Deborah and Clint for their continued support and work within recovery. So the final, I guess, response here from Clint, again, what's your advice to service providers regarding recovery and helping others recover?
So my spiritual way of life is Neopi Sweat Lodge, and actually I'm more connected to the Lakota than I am the Oneida in my spiritual path with the Neopi. Mitaki Ese. Everything is in relation to everything. We're all connected. Portugal says this shouldn't even be called addiction. It should be called lack of connection. Chief Seattle says, I don't care where you went to school, what social class of people you hang into. I just want to know when you find yourself all alone, do you like the company you keep? There's two things. We need to reconnect as two-legged, as individuals, as people, and respect each other. And a lot of sweat lodge, I talked a lot in my sweat lodge, shut up, nephew, listen, listen, nephew. I talk a lot. Still have that problem. But like Deborah said, connection. Let's listen to each other. Let's be compassionate. And those of you listening today, something that bothers me so much when I start looking into these grants, they're like at an 80-20, 70-30 split where it's job creation for people that don't have substance abuse disorder, transportation. It goes into the people. The services aren't going to the people that have substance abuse disorder. These grants are lagging. The scales of justice are uneven. My family, my friends, and my community are dying from this every day, and I've been to more funerals than I care to count, more fires than I care to count. I understand both sides need it, but can we at least balance the scales of justice too, please, a little bit on the grants? I really hate to do this to you right now, but I got 20 minutes to get to the courthouse for my wife's child support, and I have to keep my own house in order, and my wife comes first, as much and as passionate as I am about this, but I'm sure Deborah will be able to answer any questions, or Mark. God bless. Yanko, thank you, and it's been a pleasure to be able to speak to you today. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks, Clint. You can just leave it.
Thank you, Clint.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, everybody. Dr. Anderson, how would you like to proceed?
Well, if anyone from our group, our audience, or participants have any questions, I know I have a couple questions for you all if possible, and then we can open up to a few people that want to have questions at this time. So I'll go first. One of my questions are how the younger generations in the community are adjusting with or not adjusting with the stigmas or the recovery, or what's their outtake on, being in that space? You're both on mute.
Okay. Can you repeat that real quick?
How the younger generations handling or adjusting with the stigmas and or recovery components in your community, and how they are, if they're participating, or what's your outtake on that space in the community, the younger generation?
Well, I've only been back here like a few years in this community. I probably don't have the best answer for that, but I think the ones that are having issues again, even though we're in, whether we're in an urban environment or whether we're on the reservation, I've noticed in recent discussions that we still have this identity crisis, right? I felt, I guess at one point I felt like the people here, they have all this here, but when the historical trauma that we talked about comes down like that, um, that's just it. Families don't utilize it all the time. And so I think even with the children today, I think what's happening and how we're starting or beginning to handle some of this is that, we are really trying to make those connections. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question right, but
You are.
we're really trying to make those connections for them through culture, through language, through rites of passage. There's a big push for the rites of passage so that, children know, because there's a responsibility as men and women here. There's a responsibility that they have to themselves. And so through those connections, I'm, and this is what I'm pushing for, the prevention side of this. Um, so that, because it's not just those that, it's just not people with addiction. We have people just having a hard time in life. They may not be an addict, alcoholic, or, whatever, but they're having a hard time in life in general. So this is what we're trying to really push and strive for in our community here now, I believe, is that connection to one another, that support for one another, um, what our spiritual teachings are, and how we get that across to our youth. Um, I think there's more, I've seen more youth now reaching out and saying, this is what I need. Um, some of the examples that I just have within my own family. My grandchildren will say, "Hey, I need a sweat," or "Hey, Grandma, what does this mean?" When their grandfather was alive, through uh, this whole thing, my own recovery. My hardest thing was losing my husband to COVID in 2020. He was a big part of this. You know, this healing that we were both going through. And if I didn't have that support and that connection, I would have never made it through that. Um, so I think that our youth now are learning to, and they're speaking up more. Um, uh, I've talked to some of the teachers, one of the teachers in the high school, and I know one in the grade school. And, right now they're talking about how they really see a difference. There's a connection there of, because the culture and the language are being more prominently taught and coming through in some different ways. I'm not exactly sure how they're doing it, on a daily basis, but, they are making those connections. So the youth are looking, they are speaking up, they are looking for it, they're asking for it. And, hopefully we continue as the adults in this community to provide that for them.
Thank you. That answered pretty well. Go ahead, Mark.
And I'll follow up on that. For the Oneida Nation, we are extremely fortunate with the resources that we have. We have a comprehensive health division that employs over 300 people. Included within that is a behavioral health department. So our community does have access to services, and that's in addition to our grassroots efforts within the community, our nonprofit organizations. And we're also located near a major population, which is Green Bay. So we're able to attract professionals to work within our population. The Oneida population is about 17,000. On or near the reservation, we have about 8,000 tribal members. So we have not only resources within the reservation, but we also have resources in the greater Green Bay area. And mental health is taken seriously within our population. We recently, so we have a recreation area that serves youth on the reservation, and we recently moved mental health professionals into our recreation department to provide mental health services on a daily basis to that population. Um, so we're a strong people, we're a resilient people, and we have the resources to continue to address our health and wellness. Um, of course, we haven't um, found the answer to everything. Uh, Again, our population is about 17,000 based on the information that we've confirmed. We're experiencing about 4 overdose deaths every quarter. There are other populations that are experiencing much worse, much more dramatic um, outcomes as a result of substance use. Um, so we haven't found all the answers, um, but at the same time, we have a lot of resources to help to improve the health and wellness of our population. And um, when you're speaking from a Native perspective, there's always an emphasis on taking care of our elders and taking care of our youth. And your question revolved around youth, and so we have had the ability to take care of our youth within our population. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you, Mark. And my last question, we have one in chat, but the last question I want to ask is, I know you came from the perspective of the Oneida Nation, but how is there any other type of interconnectedness with other tribes or other nations that you work with, or how is that? Is that something that is possible, or is it done, or what's the situation with that? Any thoughts?
Well, as far as for myself, it's always important for, yeah, I mean, I think the nations throughout the United States realize that, you know, we do work with one another. I'm not, I know that just like recently, and Mark, I'm not sure if you know this, the different tribes that have worked to open up the new facility. I think it's a youth treatment center, but it was established and is in the works yet, I think, with about 3 or 4 other, I can't remember, nations. For myself, as just an individual and a grassroots person, like I try to make those connections with the surrounding nations. Like Menominee Nation is not too far away from me. I still have connections with Chicago. I have various people I know that have moved to, like, you know, California and different states at times, and we keep in touch with one another. They'll still connect with me and say, hey, you know, I'm having a hard time. So just making those connections that way. I know the Menominee Nation also has recently opened up quite a few recovery circles in their own community. So what I've been trying to do now is to support them, because they would come down here and come to our meetings. And I would encourage them to just start a fire. You know, all you need is 2 people, you know, 3 people, just get it going. And now they have several meetings up there in the past like month. And so I have people who want to go. So I just show up at my house this time and we all go up in the same car. So we've been supporting their meetings that way. This connection and this respect that we, you know, have to understand that we have, and like I said, we can't do this alone. We need to work with, you know, I know sometimes there's, different of opinions, and sometimes you have hard discussions with, you know, different people, but you still have to, in the long run, you have to realize that this is bigger than all of us. So we really need to work together and connect and make those connections. And this is part of what, as adults, that it's our responsibility to do for our youth, so that they don't feel like they can't ask for the help, or they shouldn't ask for the help, or they have to do it alone. Any of those things. So yes, I think that we are all in our various stages of departments or individuals or whatever. We're all trying to make those connections, and not just with nations, with the different resources in Green Bay, or different places in Appleton that might be good facilities for our individuals to attend to for treatment or whatever it may be. And even spiritual practices, with each other. So
Thank you, Deborah. And I'm gonna have at this time Allison ask the questions from chat. So I think it's 2 questions at this time.
I see one for sure. If I
Okay.
don't get the other one, let me know, Dr. Anderson. Andrea had asked, I heard a lot about the importance of connections throughout the conversation. What sort of systemic changes in schools and communities do you think would help to ensure the children and youth of today have connections which may help avoid future substance misuse? It's like they're trying to decide who's going to go.
So within our language, we have a word called Dwawajilai, and that word recognizes that we are all family, and it's really not specific to one tribe, one race. It's really all people. We're all family, and for our youth, it's important for them to find belonging, and to break down stigmas in that regard. So maybe I definitely heard it from Clint, for specifically for Native youth, and it's really true for youth in general. There's a lot of reasons why kids are bullied, a lot of reasons why kids are picked on, and thus a lot of reasons why kids don't have a sense of belonging, or that connectedness, or that shared sense of all of us being family. And so, just off of that, one suggestion is a focus with our youth, and I've worked with youth as young as 7 years old. We did youth programming I did youth programming for 13 years in a previous role, and what I learned during that time was, I had my own thoughts on what should be introduced at each age. And what I learned through those 13 years is a 7-year-old can really comprehend and understand a lot more than I thought they could. And I have 3 boys. But in working with youth, we started introducing more difficult, more challenging, more complex topics at a younger age, and the youth just picked it up, and were able to have a deeper sense of understanding than what I thought they could. And with that was teaching acceptance and realizing that everybody has their own gifts, and that's a cultural concept within Oneida culture, probably within other cultures, that each of us have our own gift. So if you see the individual that can play basketball and seems to score 20 points every game, and it's simply amazing, that may be their gift. Your gift may be something else, and our gifts help to identify our purpose in life. And so when we would have that conversation with youth about understanding their own gifts and realizing that all of us are different. So if you see the basketball player, that's great, that's awesome. Find ways to support them, but also understand what your own individual unique gifts are, and find ways to grow your own individual gifts. Deborah, do you have any answer to the question?
I mute myself all the time. You answered like so many things there. I have to ask what the question was again.
Sort of systemic changes in schools and communities do you think would help to ensure the children and youth of today have connections which may help avoid future substance misuse?
Well, gosh, I really, in Chicago, I remember we had opened up a school for the the Native American children in various communities at one point. And we pushed to have them all bused to this one school so that they could, there was more than one Native child in one school or whatever, so that there was a groups of them and basically they were together and they could be bused there so that they could connect with one another. And I think that's one of the things that, like here, you have that. We have our own school here, we have our own high school. And I think that's the real, like when he was talking about, we're no different than, we're nations and everything like that, but we're no different than other societies in the fact that our kids, yes, they get bullied and yes, they get, they go through these things, I mean, these things in life that happen. But trying to make sure, I guess, that connection for them is there, along with the stability. When you go in and I think White Bison even does some training with, they have trainings for different things. They have training for people in recovery, for adults, but they also have trainings, and we did that in Chicago as well with the youth, like the girls, and then one for the boys. And that just gives them that opportunity to, realize their worth. I got like so many things going on in my head right now. I'm thinking about my own family. When my children are growing up, it didn't matter if it was your relative, if it was another Native child in the community, or if it was a non-Native child. My kids understood that, their parents were going to help them deal with whatever it was, or help their friend, whoever they were. So this is what we really have to keep, I guess, establishing for our children, is that, that connection means we respect each other. We respect everybody, so we're going to help anybody that needs our help. And, that's what I personally love about my children. They care about everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. I see that in my grandchildren. So I see that changing. And those are the kinds of things that we have to keep, through that connection. Those are the kinds of things that we have to keep doing for one another, so that we don't have the stigmas, that, oh, you come from over there, or, oh, you're this color. It would be wonderful, wouldn't it, if we could get back to the fact that we just seen the person and not the color and not the differences. And, again, as adults, that's our responsibility to make sure that we enforce that, in such a good way that, because where do they get that from? Where does the bullying come from? They aren't born with that. I mean, those are things that are learned because they see and they hear. So we have to we are those that are supposed to be teaching them and guiding them. And, this is what we have to get back to as adults and individuals. We have to, practice those things that we tell our kids to do. We have to, have those tough discussions, but not walk away from each other angry and mad that we can't, figure this out. So again, I can go off on tangents, but I mean, this is the kind of thing that it's just this huge circle, that whether it's addiction or not addiction issues, there's so many things and so many directions that we have to handle for ourselves, whether it's spiritually, mentally, physically, or, I know what's emotionally.
A lot of wisdom there, Deborah. No, wow. I wondered about the balance to both you and Mark, that the community is shrinking, what, 1% to 2% you shared. Is that, Deborah, you're sharing this beautiful message, both of you are, and Clint too, about the whole community of just people, right? That we're all connected. Is it really important that the elders in the Native community continue to reach out to the children so that they're getting the richness of their heritage? And how do you see that impacting substance use? And
Well, again, the best examples I can give are from my own family. It's not that our kids aren't going to try something at some point. I mean, just going through the stages of life, as we all know, we all get curious, we all whatever. But hopefully, you're hoping that your children, your grandchildren, or whatever, are going to really think, and then when they do something that they realize isn't good, they can turn that around quicker than, before it gets too bad, or they know that they can come and talk to us about anything. I can tell you, in my family, I didn't have these discussions with my mother and my sisters. And, when we talk about, the things that, are trickled down, I mean, as well as everybody knows, there are things, at my age anyway, when I was younger, we did not talk about such things, and, we weren't very open about it because we just, I mean, I think people, like, if we would have had our culture, if we would have had our teachings and all those things, we would have been open, but we lost some of that. And so then we didn't even say anything anymore because of the hush hush, or because we weren't supposed to be doing this or practicing our stuff, right? So today, my kids, my children, and they're adults, they're in their 30s and 40s, and one's in late 20. Oh my gosh, they bring everything to me. They talk to me about everything and anything. It doesn't matter. My grandchildren now do the same thing. I hear my daughters now telling me the conversations they are having with their kids. They're talking to them about, maybe they're not sure about who they are as an individual. Who do they like? And they can have those open conversations, the kinds of relationships they want to have. They're trying to figure it out, and it's okay to have that conversation. I guess I'm back on another tangent over here.
part of my question was, how do we keep connecting people back to the community? So the Native community, do you feel like we're losing some of that? That the knowledge that, well, for instance, your children come to you and your grandchildren come to you. Mark, do you see where I'm going with this, or am I?
I do, and I think the connection is growing. Again, we have, and I guess if from, so Deborah mentioned that there was the Religious Freedoms Act of 1978. And with the passing of that act, it allowed, and that's a scary word, but it allowed Native people to start practicing their cultural ways again. There were always individuals within our communities who retained our cultural ways, but there were a lot of individuals who lost their cultural ways, partially because of assimilation, partially because of boarding schools, partially because of other reasons. After 1978, I think a lot of Native communities started to reclaim their cultural ways very aggressively, and started building programs, started building opportunities for community to learn who they are, their cultural ways, their ceremonial ways. And our community falls into that category, where we now have our own high school, we have our own elementary school, we can teach our history and culture to our own children. If you go to an outside community, you may not learn your culture or history if you're an indigenous person. We also have cultural centers within our community, where individuals can go, feel welcome, and learn their ceremonial or cultural ways. We have programs, other opportunities for people of all ages to participate. And it really is a beautiful thing. And those opportunities are increasing. Really, we all, regardless of age, have a role in reclaiming our culture. But for a lot of people, it really isn't work. It's filling in something that was missing in all of us. And so you see our population gravitating towards these opportunities, without much of a carrot being put out there for them. They want to fill in those empty spaces, and so that, for my opinion, it has been beautiful to watch evolve over the decades.
So to add to that, you just made me think about the other things that we do. So our powwows, that engages everybody of all ages. Our longhouse, where we have our ceremonies for every season, that engages the whole family. Everybody comes, and so just different events around the community. I think even the library has things where they have the creation stories. So a lot of things are being brought back and taught on a regular basis right now. And if you missed it once, there's another opportunity next week to do it again. I know for myself, just in trying to figure out, because our creation story is, oh my gosh, I will never understand the whole concept of everything. And I used to think, when I seen the different spiritual leaders here, or different, just in general, people who have studied this to bring it back, say, okay, we're going to have this event over here. They're going to be talking about the creation story. They're going to be talking about this part of it. They're going to be, and I thought, I heard that already. But every time I heard it, I learned something new. So I realized that I have to keep going to these different things, because you learn a little more every time. And so those are the same things that are happening now, and they continue to happen, so that our youth keep hearing the same. I'm sure that some of them probably feel like I heard this before. But, you know, I was invited, my one granddaughter asked me, she said, so for healing, for us to feel good, my grandchildren know there are different things that they can do. They can go to sweat lodge, they can go to ceremony, they can, you know, we make sure they get their Oneida name. You know, I've done that. When they become of age, there are certain things that they can do. So they realize these things are happening now. And she asked me, my one granddaughter had asked me, you know, because like if they're not feeling the best, um, can we go do this? You know, and so sometimes things aren't available. And like in my life, in my recovery, I utilized anything and everything that came to me on a daily basis.
Mhm.
It wasn't just my culture. It just wasn't spiritual. Could have been something else. And so even my grandchildren see that. So like when we weren't able to do the thing that she was asking at the time, what we did was we wound up going up to Menominee actually, and you know, being a part of something culturally that they were doing at the time. And while we were there, she turned and looked at me and she said, "This makes me feel really comfortable. I feel really welcome here." So these are the types of things where this connection and with the elders and the youth and you know little babies, you know, it's it's there, it's needed, and it's being provided. It's getting better, but it's all in regards to healing and recovery.
We have a question in the chat. What kind of support is available for the Two-Spirit communities?
So we've had, we've been fortunate to have individuals within the community that really want to drive that programming within our population. We have a group called TAP, that's the Tribal Action Plan, and they host events throughout the year, support groups, activities, different events for our Two-Spirit population. And they also have an emphasis on youth. So again, if we're talking about breaking down stigmas, creating a sense of belonging, finding support for our youth, it's our TAP group, but they also work with other individuals within the community. So we do have events throughout the year, um, and participation for those events has been um, supported by the community, which is essential for the success of those events, and also for the participants, and they've been participated well. There's again a lot of positive outcomes in our community. We're a strong community. We're a resilient community. Um, we haven't found all the solutions, but there's a lot of things that are working in our favor.
Are there any other questions that we have from participants today? I think I'm going to send it back to Dr. Anderson, and then we're going to have some closing slides that have survey links. So please take that. I know Clinton, Deborah would, and Mark would love to hear what you thought of today's presentation. And thank you both very much.
All right. Well, thank you again, Clint, Deborah, and Clint, and Mark for your outstanding, heartfelt, you know, it was gut-wrenching. So we appreciate you sharing your story, the resources. And Mark, I'm gonna ask if you have any resources for us to get a participant. You send those to Allison, like for links or all the stuff you said about the recreation center and the recovery circles. I know Deborah mentioned that, things like that for us to send out to participants. We really appreciate that. But this is awesome. It's, you know, priceless. Just can't duplicate this. You can't duplicate stories and the experiences we have with one another. So thank you again for taking the time out. and everyone participating. And at this time, we will turn it over back to Allison for the closing slides. And please do submit the survey for us to we look at the surveys a lot and to make our presentations a little bit better and more heartwarming and focused on what you want. So thank you again for your time. And this will be the end for this session. The next session will be in May, and the focus will be child, adolescent, and young adult mental health. So that'll be in May 22nd. So thank you again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your morning.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah and Mark. Thanks everyone for being with us. We sure appreciate your being with us today. Take care. We'll be setting up a follow-up email as well.